Every civilization leaves a door someone forgot to open. This is case file number 7. The story begins in the rugged terrain of the West Bank during the late winter of 1946, where history was not uncovered by archaeologists with trowels and brushes, but stumbled upon accidentally. A Bedouin shepherd named Muhammad Edi had sought a stray goat that had wandered into a narrow fissure near the ruins of an ancient settlement known as Qumran. In his search for the animal, he cast a stone into one of several caves overlooking the dry riverbed of Wadi Qumran. Instead of hearing the rustle of grazing livestock or the howl of wildlife, the shepherd heard something that would change the course of biblical scholarship forever: the distinct sound of pottery shattering deep within the dark recesses of the cliff face. The discovery itself was chaotic and unplanned by design. As the stone struck a clay jar hidden in the darkness, it revealed secrets buried under layers of sediment for nearly 2 millennia. The initial find yielded 3 scrolls inside ceramic containers that had remained undisturbed since the destruction of their community centuries prior. These artifacts rested on wooden shelves within caves scattered along the northern shore of the Dead Sea, sheltered from the harsh desert winds and intense solar radiation that would have destroyed organic materials elsewhere. What emerged was a collection of texts written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, containing not only biblical manuscripts but also religious commentaries known as sectarian writings that offered an intimate glimpse into the life and beliefs of the group who inhabited Qumran before their violent end. For decades, these scrolls remain locked behind bureaucratic red tape and shifting political borders between Jordan and Israel, delaying comprehensive study until 1956 when they were moved for preservation in Jerusalem's Rockefeller Museum. Some researchers speculate that the original community living at this site was a Jewish ascetic sect seeking to prepare themselves for an impending apocalypse. Yet their precise theological stance remains a subject of intense academic debate today. The texts provide a unique window into Second Temple Judaism just before its fracture following the Roman siege of 70 CE, challenging modern understandings of how sacred traditions were transmitted and preserved in antiquity. As scientists now apply new DNA testing technologies to fragments previously dismissed as degraded dust, these ancient words are once again speaking directly to us from the arid silence of Judea's desert edge. Deep within the arid cliffs of Qumran near the Dead Sea, 11 distinct caves held secrets that had remained sealed for nearly 2 millennia until their dramatic exposure in 1947 by local goat herders seeking fresh water. The initial discovery was merely a glimpse into what would eventually unfold as one of the most significant archaeological events in human history, yielding over 900 manuscripts from these secluded hiding places. As explorers and scholars systematically excavated each cavern across decades of work, they uncovered not only fragile fragments but also complete scrolls that defied expectation, transforming our understanding of ancient Jewish society while revealing a community that had lived in isolation for centuries before their sudden abandonment. The sheer scale and diversity of the collection stunned researchers upon sorting through the recovered materials, which included the oldest known surviving copies of Hebrew Bible texts dating back to roughly 300 BCE alongside previously unknown writings detailing strict community religious rules. These documents span a critical historical window from approximately 258 BCE until around 6E8 CE, providing an unprecedented look at life before and during the First Jewish-Roman War. Using painstaking paleography and radiocarbon dating methods, experts were able to construct a precise timeline of this library in the desert, confirming that these texts predated previously assumed dates for many biblical manuscripts and offered fresh insight into theological debates and sectarian divisions within Second Temple Judaism without relying on legend or myth. The atmosphere surrounding the site remains heavy with unanswered questions regarding exactly who lived there until 68 CE when Roman forces forced their departure during a violent uprising. Some researchers speculate that fire may have been intentionally set to destroy evidence before fleeing, sealing fate for these communities while preserving their words in dry desert air where decay is slow and rare. While the physical remains tell us much about material conditions and scribble habits, they also whisper of intense spiritual convictions held by groups who viewed themselves as guardians of truth against a changing world that ultimately swallowed them whole. For decades, thousands of parchment fragments lying scattered in museum drawers and digital archives have existed without a clear physical connection to one another. Crafted from animal skins that were carefully cut and folded before being inscribed with ancient Hebrew or Aramaic script, these pieces offer only shadows of their original form. Scholars possess the handwriting styles and contextual clues, yet they remain unable to definitively confirm which fragments once belonged to the same continuous scroll. The parchment itself has degraded over millennia, turning fragile sheets into a chaotic mosaic that resists simple reconstruction. Without direct physical evidence linking specific scraps together, researchers have often relied on speculative methods to piece back these lost texts. They attempt to match ink density, collagen composition of the skin, and palimpsest layers where text was scraped away only to be written over again. However, such techniques are prone to error when dealing with fragments that were separated centuries ago or subjected to different environmental conditions during excavation. Some researchers speculate that early assumptions about scroll ownership may need revision as new data emerges, leaving gaps in our understanding of who wrote what and why it was preserved. The recent introduction of ancient DNA testing aims specifically to solve this long-standing problem by providing a biological fingerprint for the parchment itself. Unlike ink or paper, which can be copied endlessly without changing their material origin, animal skin retains unique genetic markers that could theoretically link disparate fragments from different caves into single historical documents. This approach promises to rewrite our understanding of textual transmission, turning isolated shards into recognizable family units with unprecedented accuracy. As scientists prepare to analyze the biological history embedded in these ancient sheets, they hope to finally restore order to a collection long defined by its fragmentation and silence. For decades, scholars treated these ancient fragments as a single, cohesive library recovered from Qumran, assuming that pieces found together in a cave must have once been bound to the same scroll. This assumption rested on physical proximity rather than biological evidence, leading researchers to group manuscripts based solely on their discovery location and general script style. However, modern science has begun to peel back these layers of convenience, revealing that our understanding of what was written where is far more fragmented than previously believed. The old maps of the library are being run by archaeologists brushing away dirt, but by scientists reading the genetic code hidden within the parchment itself. In a groundbreaking shift during the early 2020s, teams led by geneticists turned their attention to the animal skin substrate rather than just the inked text on top. By extracting ancient DNA directly from the collagen of the leather sheets, they could identify exactly which species provided each fragment with unprecedented accuracy. The results were startlingly specific. A piece of parchment assumed to belong to the Great Isaiah Scroll was genetically proven to come from cattle, while adjacent fragments turned out to be derived entirely from sheep or goats. This biological fingerprinting definitively shattered the notion that these diverse scraps ever formed a single original document, proving they were likely discarded separately and later mixed together by looters in antiquity before modern discovery. The implications of this genetic dissection extend far beyond mere cataloging. They fundamentally alter how we view the preservation history of Qumran's most sacred texts. If specific sections, thought to be part of a unified volume, are biologically distinct, then our reconstruction of the original scrolls may contain significant gaps or misattributions that have persisted for 70 years. Some researchers speculate that this mix-and-match reality suggests an even more chaotic and hurried abandonment of these caves than previously imagined, where scribes discarded damaged pages from different animals without concern for future scholars who would try to stitch them back together visually. The silence in the Judean desert no longer speaks only of forgotten wisdom. It whispers a complex history of biological diversity that demands we rewrite our narrative with greater humility and scientific rigor. For decades, scholars have grouped Dead Sea Scroll fragments together based solely on paleography and handwriting style, assuming that similar scripts belong to scrolls produced in the same workshop at Qumran. However, this genetic evidence has shattered those assumptions by revealing distinct populations of scribes who work simultaneously but maintain separate lineages. The direct consequence is a radical reclassification of fragment groupings, proving what was once thought to be a single library collection actually comprised multiple independent archives brought together over time. This discovery fundamentally alters our understanding of how many distinct scroll copies of specific biblical texts truly existed within the cave system, suggesting that the diversity of scribes far exceeded previous estimates and complicating the simple narrative of a unified communal scribble school. The implications for provenance are immediate and profound, forcing researchers to question where these specific texts were originally produced before they ended up in caves 4 or 5 alone. If genetic markers indicate that fragments now thought to be from a single source originated from different families or communities with divergent heritage, then the physical location of their creation must have been more widespread than the Qumran settlement itself allows for undercurrent models. Some researchers speculate that certain biblical texts found in one cave may actually represent copies brought by refugees fleeing regional conflicts rather than manuscripts generated locally over centuries, meaning our maps of scribal activity require a complete overhaul to account for these newly identified genetic distinctives within ancient Judea. This shift from script-based grouping to biological verification introduces an unsettling level of complexity into the documentary record of antiquity. We are no longer looking at a static library frozen in time, but rather witnessing the scattered remnants of competing communities, their own internal histories preserved not just on parchment but literally embedded in the DNA of the hands that wrote them. As we reassemble these fragments using genetic keys instead of ink stains alone, the picture emerging is less harmonious than previously believed. It suggests a fractured society where distinct groups coexisted with limited interaction yet produced texts that scholars once mistakenly unified under one banner. The silence of the caves no longer hides secrets but actively speaks through biological data, rewriting our entire timeline of when and how these sacred words were forged before they vanished into the dust. The discovery of over 800 ancient manuscripts in 11 caves near Qumran has forever altered our understanding of Second Temple Judaism, yet a fundamental question remains stubbornly unanswered. Exactly who are these people? For decades, the prevailing narrative linked the scrolls directly to the Essenes, a ascetic Jewish sect believed to have lived and worshipped within the ruins now known as Khirbet Qumran. This theory paints a picture of a disciplined community living in isolation from mainstream society, preserving their sacred texts until they were forced into hiding by Roman armies during the First Jewish Revolt. The physical proximity of the caves to the settlement site seemed to provide irrefutable evidence that these two entities, one producing literature and one providing shelter, were identical. However, this tidy story has never been universally accepted among scholars, and the identification of Qumran's inhabitants as Essenes remains a matter of intense debate rather than settled fact. Critics point out significant discrepancies between the archaeological data found at the site and the known practices described in historical texts regarding the Essenes, suggesting that they may have shared similar beliefs without being the same group entirely. Some researchers argue that multiple communities could have operated independently or sequentially within the region before fleeing together to scatter their writings across the cliffs of Wadi Qumran. Consequently, attributing every scroll solely to a single sect oversimplifies a complex historical tapestry where various groups might have contributed to this unique library without ever meeting under one banner. As modern DNA testing begins to probe ancient human remains found in jars and caves, new layers are being peeled back from history that could further complicate the traditional view. While initial hopes suggested these genetic analyses would finally confirm or deny the Essene connection with scientific certainty, early findings have yielded mixed results that only deepen existing uncertainties rather than resolving them definitively. Without a clear consensus on who inhabited Qumran prior to their dispersal, we must admit that our understanding of this community is still incomplete and potentially flawed by generations of assumption. The true story behind the Dead Sea Scrolls may involve more than one group, or perhaps a history far stranger than any single sect could claim, leaving us with profound questions about identity and survival in an era when ancient secrets are finally being re-examined through modern science yet still refuse to reveal their full nature without ambiguity. Now, the part historians won't confirm. Here's what if all this time we have been looking at a single, unified library of ancient wisdom. But what if that very unity is an illusion born from our inability to see beneath the surface? For decades, scholars assumed these texts formed one cohesive collection deposited in those desert caves around 68 CE, yet new genetic methodologies are beginning to whisper doubts into the established consensus. The question lingers, could there be a hidden strata of history buried literally inside the fragments we already possess, waiting for science to finally peel back the layers that tradition has kept intact? Some researchers speculate that what appears as one continuous scroll might actually represent two distinct collections merged through error or preservation techniques unknown to us. If DNA testing were applied not just to known manuscripts but specifically targeted at unsequenced margins and damaged edges currently dismissed as mere scraps, it could reveal biological markers indicating separate provenances entirely foreign to our current classification systems. Imagine discovering that a text we thought was written by the sect of Qumran is genetically linked to a completely different group or region, shattering the assumption that these caves contain only one community's legacy and suggesting instead a complex tapestry of conflicting groups sharing sacred space long before they were sealed away. This possibility casts an ominous shadow over our current understanding, forcing us to confront the likelihood that we have ignored evidence simply because it didn't fit the neat boxes historians built around 1947. It is not about aliens or lost races. Those are fantasies that distract from the real mystery lurking in plain sight within the dust of Judea. If such a separate collection exists, its revelation would rewrite the narrative of Second Temple Judaism and early Christianity simultaneously, proving that our entire historical timeline might be missing chapters we cannot yet imagine. Until then, these fragments remain silent witnesses to secrets they were never meant to share with us in this form. While the scientific community eagerly awaits final results from recent genetic analyses of Dead Sea Scroll fragments, it is crucial to understand that we are only scratching the surface of this ancient puzzle. To date, DNA testing has been performed on just a tiny fraction of the thousands of manuscripts discovered in the Qumran caves across the West Bank's arid landscape. This limited sampling means our current understanding of who handled these texts and where they originated remains incomplete at best. As researchers continue to process samples preserved for nearly 2 millennia, it is highly probable that existing classifications regarding authorship and provenance will need significant revision once new data becomes available, fundamentally altering the historical narrative we have constructed around this archaeological treasure trove. The implications of such findings extend far beyond simple genealogical updates. They challenge our very conception of daily life in Judea during the 1st century BC. Some researchers speculate that undiscovered genetic markers could link specific scrolls to obscure sects or individual scribes previously dismissed as anonymous, forcing a complete re-evaluation of religious practices and social hierarchies within this isolated community nestled against the Dead Sea's saline embrace. Until these questions are fully answered, the true identities behind many of these sacred writings will remain shrouded in uncertainty, leaving historians to piece together history from broken clay and fragile parchment while waiting for science to fill in the missing pieces of a fragmented past that refuses to stay still. But case file number 7 wasn't the strangest door we found. Case file number 8 is about a fireplace nearly 800,000 years old, older than our own species. Some say it shouldn't be opened at all.